Dayna, thank you so much for joining us. You know, our audience is likely not shocked to hear that some companies might not be exploring opposition to logging or mines or dams or pipelines, and even if they are exploring that opposition, maybe they're not disclosing it or they're downplaying it to investors. Can you tell us why you folks wanted to take a closer look at what's going on?
Sure. I mean, we had some familiarity with the Ring of Fire region and the controversy around it. And in particular, what we were seeing and looking at mainly the environmental assessment processes and how they were playing out there was that there was quite a lot of both Indigenous opposition, but also a lot of movement in the situation. And, you know, because the students are interested in learning about securities law when they're at law school, and there's a lot of talk about environmental, social, and governance factors and how those are, you know, coming into play, gaining much more significance with companies. The students were interested in taking a look at how that was playing out in this particular context. And we were surprised to see that, you know, over the period of disclosures that we looked at, the boilerplate language about the potential for Indigenous claims to influence the projects was very stable, right? It was just kind of boilerplate. It was the same over that period. And what we were seeing on the ground was actually that things were pretty volatile and things were shifting, and First Nations were making very specific claims about their opposition to the projects, and none of that was mentioned in the disclosures.
You know, is there something that should be happening to remedy this so that nobody's surprised when there's opposition to logging or to mining or to a pipeline? Like, what should be happening to, I guess, you know, consider Indigenous interests, but also to protect investors too, who might be looking, going, well, we had no idea that this is where we sank our money.
Yeah. Well, I think ideally we would have regulators that would be enforcing those obligations to disclose. We're going to also need probably courts to interpret what we mean when we say a material fact or a material change, and, you know, what's required in those disclosures, because I think, you know, the public's expectation is moving on that, and people expect to be able to understand what is the situation on the ground. And I think it's, you know, it can be hard to understand from a distance.
Well, and I think I was going to say that too. You know, we're now at a point in time where Canadians are finally looking at reconciliation. You know, how is this going to compute when we look down the path to reconciliation, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it can be really hard, and it's hard in this situation because there are First Nations on both sides of these projects, right? And that is what we're seeing in a lot of these controversies across the country. And so, you know, as we were saying, from the outside, it can be really difficult for people to understand, make sense of that. But I think it's also, you know, clear that investors want to know whether or not there are First Nations or other Indigenous organizations that are on side with the project, that people also want to know if there's opposition, right? And so that's in part what we objected to, this kind of like cherry picking of the communities that you're willing to mention in the disclosures. You talk about those that are on side with your project, but you don't talk about those that are not. And that's just not the full story. That's the point we're trying to make.
Well, point taken, and we thank you for taking the time to share this with us. It's certainly well-timed as we're all thinking about reconciliation today. This is going to be an important factor in that as Canada moves forward, for sure.
Thanks for having me.